Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Saturday Facebook Live. I am Jen Dowd, one of the nerdy girls filling in for Malia Jones, who's taking a much-deserved vacation. So I'm one of the nerdy girls, and my background is in demography and epidemiology and a sprinkling of economics as well. So I'm definitely 100% nerd, and I'm pleased to be joined by my fellow nerdy girl, Dr. Lindsey Leininger, a public health scientist at Dartmouth. And yeah, how are things going, Lindsey, there in New Hampshire?
Things are good. We're entering into mud season, which is not when New Hampshire is at its best, but afterwards is summer, which is glorious here. How about you? How are things in London?
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, I'm here in London, I should say, and we're still in lockdown, so it's actually, pretty chill. Nothing's open. We can't do too much but get outside. So we don't have anything really opening up until April 12th. So yeah, it's a bit different over here, but cases have been coming down mostly, and vaccinations are up, so I can't complain.
That's how we want it to go, right? Like the cases down and the vaccinations up.
It's going in the right direction. Yeah. So before we dive into our follower questions, I know there's been a little bit of news this week on vaccines for pregnant people and some trials in kids. So I wondered if you could give us a quick lowdown on some of that new news.
Yeah, so the news is good indeed, as you said. So there is a hot off the press study published in a well-regarded medical journal demonstrating that vaccination is safe for pregnant and breastfeeding people, which is terrific. Also safe for the babies. So small sample size, about 130 folks in the sample, but the good news is that the data are strong, the design is strong, and we will continue to amass much more data on this topic because there are continuing trials in the field. Happy news for pregnant breastfeeding people. Second piece of good news is that we are now seeing trials being launched, Pfizer specifically, in kids as young as 6 months old, babies. So that's terrific. That is a strong signal that scientists feel comfortable enough with the safety profile that they can start studying it in even younger children. That's a necessary step to get vaccines appropriately studied and approved for broad use in kids. So again, piece of good news. Stay tuned. We will have a related post on this issue later tonight.
Excellent. No, that's such good news. We get so many questions about when are the vaccines going to be ready for kids under 16. So hopefully it won't be too much longer, and we've seen a good safety profile so far. And just the third little bit of vaccine news I'll throw in from this week, of course, were the AstraZeneca US trial results. And we had a post on this a couple days ago, but you might have seen that there was a lot of crazy, strange communications coming out, starting with AstraZeneca's press release on Monday, and then kind of a rebuttal of some sorts coming out from the National Institutes for Infectious Disease, saying, well, these results aren't the full story. So I think Helen Branswell from Stat News said it has more twists and turns than an Agatha Christie novel. Yeah, the AstraZeneca saga continues. So it's still unclear why the communication has been just a challenge, but I think we do want to emphasize that despite some of this chaos with press releases, the actual science news is really good. The efficacy was 76% for preventing mild to moderate disease, and even much higher for severe disease. So it actually is scientifically really good news, despite the poor communication, that we continue to get more effective vaccines. And that's going to be so important for rolling out globally, because the AstraZeneca vaccine is actually one of the cheaper ones, and again, can be stored at normal temperatures. So it's really going to be important for getting the world vaccinated. So I was happy for that news, despite the messy press releases, which I guess is just one of those things that happens. So before we get on to our follower questions, I also wanted to say a huge thank you to Bridges for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing for providing our live closed captioning by Lucinda Plexico and ASL interpretation from Jeannie Settlemeyer. Thank you very much. We're going to be continuing with this service, I believe, a few more weeks. It's been kind of in an experimental stage. So if you are using it, it's really helpful if you mention that in the comments, and then we can kind of gauge, how we might be able to continue doing this in the future.
And I have some fun news that I'd like to share with those watching. Our friend and gal pal, Dr. Emily Smith, Baylor University, friendly neighbor epidemiologist, is up for a Data Hero Award. How cool is that? So go Emily, go Dr. Smith. We are all on your side. Please vote for her if you're so inclined. Other friends of the Nerdy Girls, including Benji Ritten and the scientist at Unbiased Science, are also up for awards in different categories. So we are cheering them on, and vote if you're so inclined. One friendly reminder before we get into the specifics of the questions: we are nerds, we study, so we don't take questions cold on this live Q&A. If you have a question, we'd love to hear it. We value your input. We can't answer all the questions, unfortunately, but we read each and every one, and it really informs our content on the page. Dearpandemic.org, find the question box there. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for your patience with us needing to study up before we answer them. Okay, so Jen, I get to ask you a question now, right?
I'm ready.
All right. Beth from Naperville, Illinois. Woohoo, Chicago area. Okay. And we have similar questions from Linda from Northern Virginia and Charlotte from San Francisco. How does the efficacy of the vaccine change if you have to wait longer than the recommended timeline between vaccine doses? For example, if you get the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine after 4 or more weeks instead of the recommended 3 weeks after the first dose.
That is a great question. Thank you, Beth, and everyone else. I know there's still a lot of uncertainty and scrambling for vaccines in many places. So, it's understandable that people might start to get concerned if they can't secure that second dose exactly at the recommended time. And the good news that I'm here to tell you is that you don't have to get stressed out about getting your second dose if it's a little bit, later than the recommended interval because of a constraint in supply or some logistics that you can't get it done. It's not going to be the end of the world. And to be very clear, you absolutely should be getting your second dose. The data are very clear that booster for the mRNA vaccines really skyrockets your antibody levels, and it's likely very important for the longer term durability of your immunity. But a few weeks delay in getting that second dose is very unlikely to lessen your protection. And I've actually really been following the science of this with great interest because I live here in the UK, where our committee that makes recommendations, the Joint Commission on Vaccination and Immunization, actually decided to purposefully delay second doses, both for Pfizer and for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is offered here. And I'm going to drop the link to their guidance in the comments, which has some of their justification for this. But they base this on evidence that there's actually good protection starting after 2 weeks after the first dose for the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines that we saw from the trials. And also immunologically, it's very unlikely that this new protection would wane within a matter of weeks. It probably actually continues to grow even from a first dose after several weeks. And we very rarely give booster shots for anything, this quickly after the first dose. It's usually months or even years after the first dose. And so why did we come up with this 3 or 4 week interval? It was likely a function of the trials, if you remember, getting started in the summer and fall last year, really wanting to try to get maximum protection in the shortest amount of time because we were in this emergency mode of the pandemic. So they were really trying to get that done as quickly as possible with maximum protection. They weren't really trying to test the optimal interval between dosing. And so, I wish they had built in some of these things along the way to have groups maybe with different intervals so we wouldn't be having this headache now. But, that didn't happen. So the challenge is those trials, did not test this. Everyone got a booster after 3 weeks for Pfizer and 4 weeks for Moderna. And so the companies themselves are unwilling to endorse delaying the second dose since they didn't test that explicitly. But in the UK, the decision was made that it would be better to get many more people vaccinated with their first dose to have that protection and stretch out the supply by delaying second doses for actually up to 12 weeks. And Canada, I understand, is doing something similar, maybe not up to 12 weeks, but delaying a bit. And the US, for whatever reason, really seemed to not consider this seriously, despite one of my favorite epidemiologists, Mike Osterholm, really pushing for at least consideration of delaying second doses. And I think the truth is now we're probably past the point in our distribution where that would really make a big difference. It was probably something that should have been done a couple months ago. But in the UK, since we have been doing this, we can see in real time what delaying those second doses is doing, including with Pfizer, because that's also been delayed here in the UK. And the data so far show really good protection against hospitalization and death, especially from one dose, even at the oldest ages. So I think that's really good news. And then the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is being used here in the UK and across Europe and lots of different countries, they actually have data from their clinical trial. It's smaller samples, so it's not necessarily that precise, but it actually suggests that longer intervals between doses ultimately provides better protection. So they looked at intervals of 8 to 12 weeks. And that's a different technology slightly than the mRNA vaccine, so we can't say for sure, but it does support this idea that your biggest increase in protection is from that first dose. And so a delay of a couple weeks in getting that booster is not something to really stress about, is I guess my main point. We have so much stress and anxiety already about getting our doses that I don't want this to add to that stress if you're having trouble getting it right on the dot of 3 or 4 weeks. And just one caveat that I want to mention is that there have been some new papers showing that certain individuals that are very immunocompromised, such as organ transplant patients or blood cancer patients, show a much lower response to the first dose of vaccines, but that it does really come up after the booster shot. So if you're in that category, then I'd say getting your second shot at the recommended interval is more important because you get a very important boost from that second shot. So the bottom line is get your second dose for sure, but don't get anxious or stressed if you can't get an appointment at exactly the right time. It's not going to impact your level of protection. And it doesn't mean that your booster won't work just as well when you do get it. So I think there's some good news there.
Yeah. Terrific. Thanks, Jen. So y'all can see Jen has been on top of this science and has totally been my go-to on this issue. So thank you.
I've been pretty obsessed with it. Yeah. I was disappointed in the US not even considering it as a strategy, but yeah, we're making decisions with lots of uncertainty all around. So this is how it's been going. So now I have a question for you, Lindsey. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Mandy from Grapevine, Texas asked, as more parent households are fully vaccinated, please, please, please address kids and COVID, such as real data for moderate to severe cases of COVID in kids. Many of my friends feel that once they are vaccinated, they will get their families out and about. They think if kids were outside, that's protection enough. Is this true? And Erica from New Jersey asked something similar. I have 3 kids, ages 8, 5, and 2. How risky is outdoor play, outdoor sports if my kids are masked? Keeping distance is hard for my younger ones.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy, and thanks, Erica. I appreciate these questions and they're on my mind too. I am a mom. I have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, so I'm wading through the same uncertainty that y'all are. So just a lot of empathy. And if we put ourselves in the before times, before COVID, Being a mom or being a parent in general is just one massive risk benefit calculation, including the outdoors. So I'm going to give you some examples. I live in rural northern New Hampshire. It's beautiful here. Being outside is so good for me and my family, and them playing with their friends outside is so beneficial for us. But you know what? We have a lot of Lyme disease here. So even before COVID, I had to spend a lot of time worrying about tick safety. Also, my daughter has a really rare genetic skin condition that makes her incredibly sun sensitive. So being outside in the sun is a threat to her health. But you know what? We don't keep her indoors all summer. We don't make her stay shut in. We have lots of wonderful clothing, SPF 50, and we let her be outside. We don't send her to outside summer camp for 10 hours a day, but we do let her play with her friends outside with some risk mitigation protocols in place. So why do I mention those examples? I mention those examples. We as parents instinctively have to do this. And now it's just all the greater in terms of the backdrop of COVID. So how do I, as a mom scientist, make these decisions that we all are facing every single day? Well, I have kind of a three-pronged process. And the first is I do my best to stay smart. The second is I consider 3 levels of risk. And the third is I always let the golden rule guide. So how do we do our best to stay smart? Y'all who have been with us for a while know what SMART is. S, space, as much as possible. M, mask, keep it on. A is for airflow, keep it fresh. Outdoors is best. R, restricted social bubble. T, time, limit your interactions. It is not an all or nothing on these SMART principles. It's a dimmer, right? It's a dial. It's not an on or off switch. So I try to do the best I can. Often I can't hit the mark on all of those things. My kids go to school, it's indoors. My kids do have outdoor play dates because the risk benefit calculation of those things for me is worth it. So consider 3 levels of risk. 1, I consider my family's level of risk. Fortunately, knock on something, we are at low risk for a bad COVID outcome. Again, not no risk, but low risk. 2, I always consider the risk levels of the people we're getting together with. If they're immunocompromised, you know, what their risk of a bad outcome is. And then 3rd, community risk. So Jen's in lockdown in London because their cases have been high. So I turn the dial down in terms of risks I'm willing to take when we have community outbreaks, because what's happening in the community affects our decisions personally. And then last but not least, I let the golden rule guide when it gets sticky. So for example, there's a friend of my son's whose parents, for completely understandable reasons, are pretty strict, and he's not allowed to play soccer outdoors right now. And you know what? I say, I totally get it. We want you to still feel included. Maybe there's a way we can do something else that makes you comfortable and still feel included. So golden rule really comes into play. Do your best, consider 3 levels of risk, let the golden rule guide. For those who want specific statistics on how many kids have been ill with COVID, hospitalized, died, especially compared with things like the flu, we're going to drop a link to a post from, I can't remember if it was yesterday or 2 days ago. That's where the straight up stats are. We're also going to drop a post that talks about this do your best, follow the golden rule down below too. So I hope that helps. And just from one mom to another, I empathize.
That's so helpful. And I think we're only going to be having these types of decisions more and more as we're in this kind of liminal in between space of hopefully the pandemic is fading, but you know, it's not quite over yet. So we have to use our judgment, I think, more and more.
I think that's right. And our next question is very much along this same theme of using our judgment and weighing the risks and the benefits in this new crazy world of COVID. So Alicia from Tucson, Arizona asks you, Jen, what is known about risk of transmission in pools? I'm anxious to get my 6-year-old, healthy, low risk, back into swimming lessons, but the thought of him doing an activity indoors without a mask and with others gives me pause. Those holding lessons are being cautious, limiting class size, limiting parent attendees, closing locker rooms. Outdoor lessons are not an option right now. If it's relevant, I'm fully vaccinated. We also got similar questions from Carl in Birmingham, Alabama, and Julie from Kennett Square, Pennsylvania.
Yes, thanks for this question. And I think it ties in really well with what Lindsay just laid out. It's really on a lot of our minds what our kids are going to be able to do this summer when we can't expect them to be vaccinated quite yet. And we will reiterate that our kids cannot quite be considered vaccinated grandparents. But as Lindsay pointed out, one of the silver linings of this whole pandemic has been they do remain at very low risk for severe COVID disease and death. So that's all, very good news. Specific to swimming, I think, one piece of good news is that SARS-CoV-2, the virus, is not going to spread through the water. If somehow an infected person is swimming and breathing into the water, you're not going to catch COVID that way. It's not like peeing in the swimming pool or other things that we might imagine diffusing throughout the water. Chlorine would inactivate any virus. And, you'd also have to kind of breathe that in or get it in your system somehow anyway. So there's actually zero documented instances of transmission through water. So that's good news. But the challenge that we face is one we still face with all of our interactions. The real risk is sharing air, with other people. And so distance and crowding and ventilation and all those SMART principles are really still key in thinking about this decision. And a lot of recreational pools, even if indoors, are very large spaces, fortunately. And so I think you could still, while outdoor pools are probably best because you've got wind and completely open air, I think in those very large indoor pools, you could expect that any virus that might be being exhaled would still dissipate and get diluted, quite quickly. So, that's, a good, positive in favor of swimming as an activity. But ideally, we'd still probably like to maintain some distance because, as you said, masking is often not possible in that context. If kids are spitting and breathing directly in each other's faces and, playing games and roughhousing in the pool, then that definitely does involve some risk. And so, you want to just at least be aware of that, taking into consideration your family's risk factors, as Lindsay mentioned. And a space that probably is riskier are locker rooms, just because that's a very, enclosed space, possibly crowded. But it is also possible to take more precautions there, such as keeping your mask on, which aren't possible in the pool. So again, just as Lindsay was saying, I'm sorry to say that it's probably not 100% black or white. You have to think about that dimmer of risk. And we want our kids to be able to get back to their summer activities, and learning water safety and swimming is certainly very important. So I think as the lessons you described include some reasonable precautions of limiting numbers and maintaining some distance. I think, and if the vulnerable adults in your household, as you say, are either vaccinated or are not at big risk, then I think it's definitely reasonable decision to take those swim lessons. So I think you could go for it. But if some people in your household or bubble are still vulnerable for some reason, or your child has specific, medical conditions, then you might want to make a different choice until kids have an opportunity to get vaccinated. It really is kind of, taking all things into consideration that Lindsay mentioned, and figuring out your own risk budget. And as Lindsay also mentioned, I just wanted to reiterate that, the final thing to take into consideration really is that level of community transmission. Right now cases have fallen a lot in the US, although they're ticking up a little bit in some states. We really hope by summer that vaccination coverage will have brought cases down, even farther. But any activity that includes mixing of households and breathing in each other's faces is going to be a lot safer if community transmission is low. And so it's just something to keep an eye on as you make your decisions as the summer rolls along. If community transmission is low, all of these things are much safer. But if we're having some resurgence, which I hope doesn't happen, then you just have to take that in mind as an important variable. So thanks for that question. I hope all our kids get to enjoy themselves and swim this summer. And I'm dropping a couple links in the comments that have some general information on pools and COVID. And I have a question, for Lindsey then. This is a really good question and a difficult one, but I know you can handle it. This is Lauren from Madison, Wisconsin. My parents are reluctant to get a COVID vaccine, and I'm desperate to convince them. They are over 60, but otherwise in excellent health, and they seem to think this means they're not really at risk of severe disease. They insist that severe fatal COVID is associated with comorbidities they don't have, such as diabetes, obesity, heart conditions, high blood pressure, and therefore they think it's very unlikely that they would become really sick from COVID if they got it. They also seem to be worried about how quickly the vaccines came to market, quote, how little we know about vaccine side effects and long-term risks. So it's kind of a wager for them. On the other hand, they're expecting new grandchildren in the coming months and are planning to travel to different states and mingle with busy families who are not extremely COVID cautious. They are currently eligible to be immunized in the state where they live, New Mexico. How can I convince them to protect themselves?
Oh boy. Oh boy. Thank you so much for sending in this question, because it's something that a lot of us are dealing with right now. And we want to be sensitive and good humans first, and we also want to stand up for science. So how do we marry those two things? So the first piece of good news is that there is ever increasing amount of data showing that these vaccines are safe and they're effective. And even the quote unquote new vaccines, this mRNA platform, is the result of decades worth of research. So that's always a really helpful frame for me when I think about this. So what's the nerdy girl playbook on how to have these sticky conversations with loved ones about vaccine hesitancy? So the first thing is to listen with love, and and listen really is the key here. It's not a, oh, let me tell you all the reasons why vaccines are great. It's listening for what feeling these people are surfing and what they're trying to contend with. So listening is key, and love is key too. We don't want to come at people with nastiness. We want to come at them with love and preserve the relationship. The second piece is really finding the right frame. So, I find myself as a scientist, as a health analytics professor, just going straight to the numbers and the data. And that works for me, but that is not the right frame for many people. So if people, for example, really want to know that their pastor says that it's okay to get a vaccine, find a pastor, find the right influencer to provide that message. Find the right frame. Okay, and last but certainly not least is know it's a process. These are not one and done kind of conversations. It is a conversation. It's probably going to take some follow-up. It's going to take some non-judgmental listening, caring, and sort of continuing accounting for the concerns. So listen with love, find the right frame, know it's a process. We have a link that Allison Buttenheim, one of the co-founders of Dear Pandemic, who is an internationally recognized expert in vaccine hesitancy, who wrote on this very topic. It will be dropped below. But as long as you keep open ears and an open heart, I think you'll be great. Jen, are you there? Oh no. Jen, did we lose
Great.
you?
Thanks for that. I apologize. My internet is
Jen is a little bit herky-jerky.
Going out of that's not affecting if that's happening. Can you hear me?
Jen, you're a little herky-jerky.
Okay,
so we're at time, and that was our last question. So I'm going to wrap us up.
Yeah, I think something is going on there.
Okay, so I'll take the final conclusion. Thank you for watching. I know y'all missed Malia, but we did our best, and it was a treat to be here. We also want to share something pretty cool. Time Magazine did a profile on Dr. Emily Smith, our partner. We were proud to be included, our partners at Impact for Healthcare. Basically, it was like the gal pal, nerdy neighborhood write up from Time, and we're so touched and honored. So thank you, Time Magazine, for telling our story. We'll be back next week. Please send your questions to dearpandemic.org. Thank you again, Jeannie and Bridges. We love your interpretation. Stay safe, stay sane. Jen, you want to cut us off? I think we might still be live. All right, we'll leave the Zoom. Thanks, friends.